Welcome to Ghostmire, where every night a new horror story drags you deeper than the last. Before anything else, hit subscribe right now. If you miss even one night, you'll miss the piece that connects all these stories into something far darker. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know exactly who's awake inside the dark with us, and listen carefully. This story has something hidden, a moment so disturbing, so unexpected, that most people don't recognize it until the very end. If you leave early, you'll never know what really happened, so stay with me, all the way to the final second. Story first, the town that remembered. Marcus Chen had been hauling freight across the Midwest for 17 years, and he prided himself on knowing every shortcut, every truck stop, and every back road between Chicago and Denver. In March of 2019, a spring snowstorm forced him off Interstate 80 near the Nebraska-Wyoming border. His GPS suggested an alternate route through what appeared to be a series of county roads, cutting through a town called Ashmont that would save him 2 hours. The snow fell heavier as Marcus guided his 18-wheeler down Highway 26, watching for the turnoff his GPS indicated. The road narrowed, pavement cracking and weathered as he entered what should have been Ashmont. The town appeared suddenly through the snow, a collection of old storefronts lining both sides of Main Street. Every building stood intact, windows unbroken, signs still hanging. But something felt profoundly wrong. Not a single light burned in any window. No cars sat parked along the street. The snow on the road showed no tire tracks except his own. Marcus slowed his rig to a crawl, studying the buildings. A hardware store, a diner called Millie's Place, a post office, a pharmacy. Everything looked frozen in time, circa 1970s, based on the faded advertisements and architecture. His CB radio crackled with static, unusual given the clear channel he'd been monitoring. He tried reaching out to other drivers, but received only that persistent, rhythmic static that seemed almost like breathing. Then he saw the sign. Outside the diner, a chalkboard menu stood on the sidewalk, protected from the snow by the building's overhang. Written in fresh white chalk were the words, "Welcome back, Marcus. Your usual booth is waiting." His blood turned to ice water. He'd never been to this town before. The GPS showed no record of Ashmont in its database when he searched, despite clearly displaying it on his current route. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and, against every instinct screaming at him to drive away, stepped out of his cab. The cold bit through his jacket immediately, but the air felt strange, thick and resistant, like walking through invisible cobwebs. He approached the diner window, shining his light inside. The interior looked immaculate, as if someone had just cleaned it. Red vinyl booths, chrome-edged tables, a long counter with stools. In the back booth, a coffee cup sat steaming. Next to it lay a folded newspaper, and even from outside, Marcus could read the headline, "Local Trucker Marcus Chen Missing, Day 4 of Search." The date on the newspaper was March 15th, 2024, 5 years in the future. Marcus stumbled backward, his flashlight beam swinging wildly across the storefront. The beam caught another sign in the hardware store window. "Marcus Chen, we have your order ready. The chains you'll need." In the pharmacy window, prescription ready for pickup. Marcus Chen, for extreme anxiety and insomnia. Every store had a sign. Every single one addressed him by name, offering services he hadn't requested, items he hadn't ordered, solutions to problems he didn't yet have. His heart hammered against his ribs as he ran back to his truck. But when he reached for the door handle, he saw fresh writing in the snow coating his driver's side window. Don't leave yet. She's been waiting to see you." Movement caught his eye. In the diner, a figure now sat in that back booth. A woman with her back to the window, gray hair pulled into a bun, wearing what looked like a waitress uniform from decades past. She raised one hand and beckoned to him, never turning around. The gesture felt horribly familiar, though Marcus couldn't place why. His radio suddenly burst to life, but instead of trucker chatter, he heard his own mother's voice. She'd been dead for 3 years. "Mijo, you were always supposed to stop here. Every route you've ever driven, every choice you've made, they all lead here. Ashmont has been waiting for you since before you were born." The streetlights flickered on, one by one, revealing more figures now visible in every storefront window. All of them faced outward, toward his truck. All of them stood perfectly still. In the barber shop, a man in a barber's coat held up a straight razor. In the pharmacy, someone in a white coat pressed their face against the glass, features obscured by the fog of their breath. In the post office, at least a dozen people stood in a line that didn't move, all staring. Marcus threw himself into his cab, fired up the engine and slammed the transmission into gear. His tires spun on the snow before catching, and the truck lurched forward. As he accelerated through the town, more lights blazed to life, every window illuminated, every door opened. The figures began to move, stepping out onto the sidewalks, all of them turning to track his truck as he passed. In his mirrors, he saw them filling the street behind him, walking in unison, following. Their pace never quickened, but they never fell behind either, maintaining the exact same distance no matter how fast he drove. The town stretched on far longer than it should have. Block after block of businesses and homes, all lit up now, all occupied by those silent, staring figures. Finally, blessedly, the buildings ended. Marcus roared back onto open highway, checking his mirrors obsessively. The town vanished into the snow behind him, but one final message appeared on his CB display screen. "See you in 5 years, Marcus." Booth still waiting. He drove straight through to Denver, didn't sleep, didn't stop except for fuel. When he finally reached his destination, he checked every map, every GPS database, every county record. No town called Ashmont existed anywhere near his route. The highway he'd driven through had been decommissioned in 1982, rerouted after unusual disappearances according to one old newspaper article he found. Marcus quit long-haul trucking the next day. He took a job doing local deliveries, never driving more than 50 miles from home. But sometimes, late at night, his CB radio turns on by itself, and through the static, he hears the sound of a diner door opening and his mother's voice calling him home. The date she mentions is getting closer. Story second, the residents who stayed. Daniel Kowalski specialized in transporting construction equipment, and in August of 2021, he found himself hauling a bulldozer to a mining operation outside Elko, Nevada. His route took him through the northeastern corner of the state, through sparse desert terrain where towns appeared on maps, but rarely in reality. When his truck developed a coolant leak at 2 a.m., his options were limited. The GPS showed a place called Thornfield, population 342, just 8 miles ahead. Thornfield appeared like a mirage, shimmering into existence as Daniel's headlights swept across a weathered welcome sign. The town seemed normal enough at first, a collection of small houses, a gas station, a general store, all arranged around a central square. But as Daniel coasted his failing truck toward the gas station, he realized something was deeply wrong. Every house had lights on, every single one burning bright despite the late hour. And in each lit window he could see figures standing, motionless, facing outward toward the street. He parked at the gas station, which also blazed with light, and stepped out into air that felt wrong, too warm and too still, carrying a smell like copper and old paper. The gas pumps were ancient mechanical models from the 1960s, but the prices displayed were current. Daniel approached cautiously, and that's when he heard the humming. It came from everywhere at once, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones, emanating from every building simultaneously. The general store door stood open, light spilling out onto the cracked sidewalk. Against his better judgment, Daniel walked inside. The interior looked like a museum piece, perfectly preserved from perhaps 1967 or 1968, with products he recognized only from childhood memories. Canned goods lined the shelves in neat rows. A cash register sat on the counter, the old mechanical kind with keys and a bell. Behind the counter stood a man in a store clerk's apron, maybe 60 years old, with a name tag reading Howard. He smiled at Daniel, but his eyes remained completely flat, reflecting the overhead lights like mirrors. "Evening," Howard said, his voice slightly wrong, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "We've been expecting you. Everything you need is already prepared." Daniel's throat went dry. "I just need some coolant for my truck. Having some trouble." "Of course you are," Howard replied, that unsettling smile never wavering. "Everyone who comes to Thornfield is having trouble. That's why the town is here." He reached beneath the counter and produced exactly the coolant Daniel needed, the right brand and type for his specific truck model. "No charge. We take care of our visitors." Through the store's front window, Daniel saw more figures emerging from the houses. 20, 30, maybe 40 people, all moving in eerie synchronization, all converging on the town square. They wore clothing from different eras, some in 1960s attire, others in styles from the 80s, 90s, even a few in more modern clothes. But they all shared that same flat, reflective quality to their eyes, and all of them were humming that low, resonant tone. "What is this place?" Daniel whispered. Howard's smile widened impossibly, his mouth stretching just slightly too far. "Thornfield is a way station, a place between places. You know how sometimes a town just dies? Businesses close, people move away, the buildings crumble? Well, Thornfield never died. It transformed. It became something else. A place where the forgotten and the lost can remain, can persist, can continue." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Would you like to stay, Daniel? It's so peaceful here. No more long drives, no more deadlines, no more fatigue. Just an eternal present where nothing ever changes, nothing ever hurts, nothing ever ends." Daniel backed toward the door. "How do you know my name?" "We know everyone who comes here. We've been waiting for each of you specifically. Some people drive through without noticing us, without seeing. But others, like you, you're sensitive to places like this. You can perceive us fully. And that means you could join us if you wanted. You could become part of Thornfield forever." The people in the square had formed a circle now, all facing inward, still humming. In the center of the circle, Daniel saw his truck. Someone had already opened the hood, and a figure in mechanic's coveralls was doing something to the engine. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and Daniel felt it tugging at something deep inside his chest, like hooks in his ribs, pulling him toward the town square. "Just walk to the center," Howard said from behind him, his voice now definitely multiple voices speaking as one. "Stand in the circle with us. Let Thornfield embrace you. You'll never be alone again, never be tired again. You'll become part of something eternal. Your truck is already fixed. We've made sure it won't start for another 30 minutes, just enough time for you to make your choice." Daniel ran. He didn't head for his truck, but for the edge of town, sprinting through the too warm night air while that humming intensified, becoming almost painful. The residents didn't chase him, didn't run. They simply turned in unison, tracking his movement, their collective hum rising to a crescendo that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. He could feel them inside his head, dozens of voices whispering, promising rest, promising peace, promising an end to the exhausting infinity of the road. He reached the town limits marked by that weathered sign, and as he crossed it, the humming stopped abruptly. The warmth vanished. The desert night's natural cold rushed back in, and Daniel collapsed onto the sand, gasping. When he looked back, Thornfield was dark. Every light had been extinguished simultaneously. The buildings looked abandoned, derelict, some with roofs partially collapsed and windows broken. His truck sat in front of the gas station, hood closed, looking untouched. Daniel forced himself upright and walked back on trembling legs. His truck started on the first try. The coolant leak had vanished. When he checked his GPS, Thornfield didn't appear anywhere in its database. He drove away as fast as he legally could, watching his mirrors until the town disappeared into the desert darkness. 6 months later, Daniel received a postcard with no return address. The front showed an old photograph of Thornfield's town square, circa 1967, with residents posed in a circle, all smiling at the camera. On the back, written in dozens of different handwriting styles, a single message: "The circle is incomplete. There's still a space waiting for you." Daniel burned the postcard, but sometimes, late at night, he still hears that humming in his dreams, and wakes up with the smell of copper and old paper in his nose, and an inexplicable longing for a place he should never want to see again. Story third: The Town That Feeds. Samantha Rivera had been driving cross-country freight for only 8 months when she took the Route 50 assignment through Nevada in October of 2020. They called it the loneliest road in America for good reason, and that night, Sam understood why. Stretches of highway extended for miles without another vehicle, without lights, without any sign of human civilization. When her fuel gauge dropped to critical around midnight, she started to panic. Her GPS showed a town called Barlow Creek 30 miles ahead, last known gas station for 70 miles in either direction. Barlow Creek emerged from the darkness like something from an old Western film. A single main street, wooden buildings with false fronts, a gas station with ancient pumps, and what looked like a saloon with actual swinging doors. Sam pulled her rig up to the pumps, expecting them to be defunct, but when she stepped out, the pump display lit up, showing ready status. The numbers were mechanical, analog, clicking and spinning like something from 50 years ago. The air smelled wrong, not like desert at night, but like meat and wet earth, thick and organic. Sam approached the gas station's main building, peering through grimy windows. Inside, the lights were on, revealing shelves stocked with food and drinks, all of it looking fresh despite packaging that screamed 1970s design. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Pumps work on honor system. Pay inside before leaving. Owner in the saloon." Sam pumped her gas, the mechanical numbers clicking steadily upward while she surveyed the town. No vehicles anywhere, no lights in the residential buildings she could see beyond the main street. Just that saloon, glowing like a beacon, with music drifting from inside. Old country music, Hank Williams maybe, scratchy like it was playing on vinyl. Despite every instinct warning her against it, Sam needed to pay for the gas. She had no choice but to enter the saloon. The swinging doors creaked as she pushed through them, and the scene inside made her breath catch. At least 30 people sat at tables or stood at the bar, all dressed in clothing from different decades, from the 1950s through maybe the early 2000s. They all turned to look at her in perfect unison, and every single face wore the same expression: desperate, ravenous hunger. Their eyes looked sunken, their skin waxy and gray, and when they opened their mouths to speak, Sam saw that their teeth were too long, too sharp, filed to points. "Fresh," one woman whispered, the word picked up and echoed by every person in the room, building to a chant. "Fresh, fresh, fresh, fresh." Behind the bar stood a man who looked different from the others, more solid, more present. He wore a bartender's vest and had slick back hair, and his smile showed normal teeth. "Don't mind the residents," he said in a jovial tone that contrasted horrifically with the situation. "They're just excited. We don't get many visitors who can actually see us anymore. Most people drive right through without stopping, without noticing. But you stopped, Samantha. You chose to see us. I need to pay for gas," Sam managed, her voice shaking. Of course, $47.32. But I'm afraid we have a different form of payment here in Barlow Creek." The bartender leaned forward, his eyes suddenly reflecting light like an animal's. "You see, this town died in 1973. There was a fire, started in this very saloon. Everyone who was here that night burned to death. But we didn't leave. We couldn't leave. And we've been so very, very hungry ever since." The residents rose from their chairs, moving towards Sam in a shuffling mass. Their hands reached out, fingers too long, joints bending at wrong angles. The desperate hunger in their faces intensified. And Sam realized they were somehow becoming more solid, more real, feeding off her fear, drawing substance from her presence. "We need life," the bartender continued. "Energy, vitality. Most people just drive through, and we get nothing but crumbs, little tastes of living essence that leak through. But when someone stops, when someone acknowledges us, interacts with us, we can feed properly. We can take years, we can take memories, we can take all the warmth and light inside you and add it to our own, sustaining ourselves for another month, another year." Sam bolted for the doors, but they slammed shut before she reached them. The residents surrounded her, their cold hands grabbing at her clothes, her hair, her skin. Where they touched, she felt cold spreading through her body, a numbing void that made her muscles weak and her thoughts sluggish. They were draining her, she realized, pulling the life force directly out of her body, feeding on her existence like parasites. Through the growing haze, Sam remembered the emergency flare gun she kept in her jacket pocket, required equipment for remote highway travel. She yanked it free and fired directly at the ceiling. The flare exploded in a burst of brilliant red light, and the residents shrieked, recoiling. Their forms became translucent, less substantial, like smoke trying to hold human shape. "Light," the bartender snarled. "Real light. From the real world. Everyone back." Sam didn't wait. She crashed through the swinging doors and ran for her truck, legs feeling like lead weights, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard the residents pouring out of the saloon, their shrieks and moans filling the night air. She threw herself into her cab, fired up the engine, and slammed her foot on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, and as she glanced in her mirror, she saw them standing in the road, watching her leave, their forms flickering between solid and translucent. But the bartender stood apart from the others, perfectly solid, perfectly clear. He raised one hand in a casual wave, and Sam heard his voice clearly, despite the distance and the sound of her engine. "The gas still needs to be paid for, Samantha. We'll be waiting for your return." and you will return. Everyone who owes us. Something comes back eventually. The road always brings them home. Sam drove for 3 hours straight before stopping at a legitimate truck stop in Utah. When she checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror, she looked different. Older somehow, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and a streak of gray hair near her temple. She'd lost something in Barlow Creek, she realized. Years maybe, or memories, or something more essential. She reported the incident to her company, but when they checked, Route 50 showed no town called Barlow Creek anywhere along its length. The State Highway Department had no records of it. Historical societies knew of no settlement by that name. But Sam's GPS showed $47.32 worth of fuel added to her tank that night. Fuel she'd never paid for. 3 months later, Sam's truck broke down on Route 50, 70 miles from anywhere. As she waited for the tow truck, she saw lights in the distance, off the road, where no lights should be. A town taking shape in the darkness, becoming visible, becoming real. Through the desert air, she heard the scratchy sound of old country music, and underneath it, dozens of voices whispering in unison. "Come pay your debts, Samantha. Come feed us. Come home." The tow truck arrived just in time, but Sam quit long-haul trucking the next day. She still wakes up sometimes with the sensation of cold hands on her skin, draining something vital, leaving her emptier than before. And she started noticing new gray hairs appearing faster than they should. New lines on her face, an exhaustion that sleep can't cure. Barlow Creek is still feeding, she knows. Still waiting, still hungry. Story 4th, the town that drowns. Thomas Beckham hauled refrigerated goods across the Pacific Northwest, and he'd driven through his share of rain during 12 years on the road. But the storm that hit Highway 101 in Northern California that November night in 2018 was something different entirely. Water fell from the sky in sheets so thick his windshield wipers couldn't keep up, and visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. When his GPS showed a town called Rainy Falls where he could wait out the storm, Thomas took the exit gratefully. The town materialized through the rain like a watercolor painting, buildings blurred and indistinct through the downpour. Thomas guided his truck down what appeared to be Main Street, looking for any sign of life, any indication of where he might take shelter. Every building stood dark, but through the rain he could make out a small hotel, a 2-story structure with a flickering neon sign reading vacancy. The rain pounded on his cab roof like hammering fists, growing louder, more insistent, almost angry. Thomas parked and made a run for the hotel entrance, getting soaked in the 5 seconds it took to reach the door. He burst inside, water streaming from his clothes, and found himself in a lobby that looked preserved from perhaps 1955. Green carpet, dark wood paneling, a registration desk with an old-style bell. And behind that desk sat a young woman in a hotel clerk's uniform from another era, her hair in perfect 1950s victory rolls, her makeup immaculate. She smiled at Thomas, but her eyes looked wet, too wet, water constantly streaming from them like tears. "Welcome to Rainy Falls," she said, her voice having a strange liquid quality, as if she were speaking from underwater. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Beckham. Your room is ready, room 217. You'll be very comfortable here. Everyone who comes to Rainy Falls during the storm stays in room 217. "How did you know my name?" Thomas asked, water still dripping from his clothes, forming a puddle around his feet. The clerk's smile widened, and water began flowing more rapidly from her eyes, running down her cheeks like rivers. "We know everyone who comes here. This is their room, Always has been, always will be. The storm brings them to us. She held out a key, an actual metal key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag. Second floor, last door on the left. Breakfast is at 7, though you'll find you won't be hungry. No one's ever hungry here. Thomas took the key with numb fingers, unease crawling up his spine. The hotel felt wrong, the air too humid, too heavy, carrying that smell of stagnant water and green things rotting. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, his wet shoes squelching on carpet that felt waterlogged, saturated, like walking on a soaked sponge. Pictures lined the walls, old photographs of the town, and as Thomas passed them, he realized they all showed the same scene. Rainy falls completely underwater, buildings submerged, streets transformed into rivers, and in every photograph, people stood in their windows, trapped inside flooded buildings, faces pressed against the glass, mouths open in silent screams. Room 217's door stood slightly ajar. Thomas pushed it open and found a perfectly normal hotel room, double bed with a floral bedspread, nightstand, dresser, small bathroom visible through an open door. Except the carpet squelched under his feet, saturated with water, and when he touched the bed, the fabric was soaking wet, water squeezing out under his fingers. The walls glistened with moisture, water running down in constant tiny streams. The bathroom faucet dripped with a rhythm that sounded almost like words, almost like a name being repeated over and over. Thomas turned to leave, but the door swung shut on its own, and the lock clicked. He grabbed the handle, twisted, pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The dripping from the faucet grew louder, faster, and Thomas realized water was beginning to seep up through the carpet, rising from below. Within seconds, it covered his shoes, ankle-deep and rising. He pounded on the door, shouting for help, but his voice seemed to be absorbed by the walls, deadened, not traveling. The window. Thomas lunged for it, but when he looked outside, he saw only water, as if the hotel were already submerged, sitting at the bottom of a lake. Through that water he could see other buildings, all submerged, and in their windows, faces pressed against the glass. Dozens of faces, maybe hundreds, all looking at him, all with mouths open in silent screams, all with water pouring from their eyes, their noses, their mouths. The water in the room climbed to his knees, his waist. It came from everywhere simultaneously, pouring through the walls, gushing up through the floor, streaming from the ceiling. Thomas climbed onto the bed, then onto the dresser, as the water continued its relentless rise. The dripping faucet had become a voice, and now he could understand it clearly, speaking his name in a wet, gurgling tone. Thomas Beckham. Thomas Beckham. Join us in the water. Thomas Beckham. Drown with us forever. Thomas Beckham. The storm never ends here. Thomas Beckham. We all sink together. The water reached his chest. Thomas's head nearly touched the ceiling now, the room almost completely flooded. He took a deep breath, preparing to go under, and in that moment of panic, his hand brushed against something in his jacket pocket. His pocket knife, a multi-tool he always carried. With water lapping at his chin, Thomas pulled it out and attacked the window, hammering at the glass with the knife's handle. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing, and Thomas struck again and again with desperate strength. The window shattered outward, and instead of more water rushing in, the hotel room's water began flowing out in a tremendous rush. Thomas was swept through the broken window by the current, tumbling through space, arms flailing. He hit ground hard, knocking the wind from his lungs, and looked up to find himself lying in mud next to his truck on Main Street. The hotel building stood dark and derelict, its windows broken, its structure clearly abandoned for decades. Rainy Falls looked like a ghost town, long dead, with collapsed roofs and vegetation growing through broken pavement. The rain had stopped. Stars shone overhead in a clear sky. Thomas's clothes were soaked, but he was alive, breathing, able to move. He pulled himself into his truck with shaking arms and found his GPS. Rainy Falls didn't appear anywhere in its database. Highway 101 showed no exits for any town by that name. Thomas drove away, but in his rearview mirror, just for an instant, he saw the hotel lights flicker on. In every window, faces pressed against the glass, watching him leave. Water poured from their eyes like endless tears, and their mouths moved in unison, shaping his name. He made it to the next real town and checked into a legitimate hotel. But when Thomas turned on the shower, the sound of the water made him collapse to the bathroom floor, gasping, remembering the sensation of drowning in that room, of water filling his lungs, of sinking forever into cold darkness. He hasn't been able to take a shower since, hasn't been able to stand in rain, hasn't been able to drive when weather forecasts show storms, and sometimes late at night he hears dripping, that rhythmic drip, drip, drip that sounds like his name being called, and he wakes up choking, his lungs burning, water streaming from his eyes like tears he can't control. Rainy Falls is still there, he knows, waiting for the next storm, ready to drown the next visitor who seeks shelter from the rain. The storm never ends in that place. The drowning never stops. And somewhere in room 217, the water is rising again, preparing for the next guest. Story 5th, the town built backward. Gerald Thompson specialized in hauling automotive parts, and in January of 2022, a delivery to a small manufacturing plant took him through eastern Montana on Highway 200. The landscape rolled endlessly, snow-covered fields and distant mountains with temperatures well below freezing. When Gerald's truck developed electrical problems around 3 a.m., his dashboard lights flickering and his radio. Cycling through stations on its own, he started looking for somewhere to pull over and investigate. His GPS showed a town called Reversal just 6 miles ahead. The town sign appeared in his headlights. Welcome to Reversal, population 412, founded 1923. But something about the sign looked wrong, and it took Gerald a moment to realize the text was perfectly clear in his mirrors, while appearing slightly blurred when looking at it directly. He shook his head, blaming fatigue, and drove into the town. Reversal looked normal at first glance. Main Street stretched through the center of town, buildings on both sides, streetlights burning despite the late hour. But as Gerald drove deeper into the town, he started noticing increasingly strange details. A clock on the bank building ran counterclockwise, a barber pole spun in the reverse direction, a flag hung with stars on the right and stripes on the left, completely inverted, and in his mirrors, everything looked correct. Gerald pulled over in front of a 24-hour diner, the only business showing signs of activity. Through the window, he could see people inside, maybe a dozen customers and staff, all moving normally. But when he stepped out of his truck and turned to face the diner, everyone inside was walking backward. A waitress poured coffee into a cup, but the liquid flowed from the cup back into the pot. A customer ate pie, but the fork moved from his mouth to the plate, leaving the pie whole again. They all faced away from the door, backing toward it rather than approaching normally. Gerald's mind reeled. He turned around, putting his back to the diner, and watched in his truck's side mirror. In the reflection, everyone inside moved forward normally, eating and drinking and conversing as they should. He turned back to face the diner directly, and they were walking backward again, unspooling their actions in reverse. The diner door opened, but it swung inward first, and then a man emerged, walking backward, facing away from Gerald. The man wore a sheriff's uniform from maybe the 1950s, complete with a wide-brimmed hat and a star-shaped badge. He stopped moving and stood perfectly still, his back to Gerald. When he spoke, his voice sounded normal, forward, coming from a mouth Gerald couldn't see. "You shouldn't be able to perceive us correctly," the sheriff said. "Most people drive through reversal and everything looks normal to them because they can't see what we've become. But you can see it, Gerald. You can see that we're running in reverse, living our lives backward, unspooling our history one moment at a time. That makes you special. That makes you dangerous." "What happened here?" Gerald asked, his breath fogging in the freezing air, but the fog moved toward his mouth instead of away from it. "In 1982, the government built a facility outside town. Particle research, they said, studying time and causality. Something went wrong. There was an accident, an explosion, but not a normal explosion. It expanded outward, and then it contracted, and then expanded again, oscillating, trapping everyone within a 5-mile radius. Since that moment, we've been living backward. We experience our lives in reverse, from death toward birth, from old age toward youth. But we remember it all. We're conscious of it. We know we're moving the wrong direction through time, and we can't stop it, can't escape it." Gerald watched in his mirror as the sheriff's reflection turned to face him. The man looked young, maybe 30, but his eyes contained decades of experience, of suffering. "We've been trying to reverse the reversal, trying to find a way to untrap ourselves. The facility is still here, still running, still oscillating. If someone from outside, someone not caught in the time loop, could reach the facility and shut it down properly, we might be freed. But everyone who tries gets caught. They start moving backward too, living their life in reverse, and they can't complete the task because their actions undo themselves." "Where is this facility?" Gerald asked, though part of him screamed to run, to drive away and never look back. The sheriff's reflection pointed down Main Street toward the edge of town. 3 miles past the town limits, there's a road that doesn't appear on any map. Follow it 2 miles into the hills, you'll see the facility. But Gerald, you need to understand, if you go there and fail, if you get caught in the reversal field, you'll start living backward too. You'll watch yourself uneat meals, undrive routes you've driven, unlive years of your life, conscious and aware the whole time, unable to stop it. Your life will unspool like a movie in reverse, and eventually you'll reach your own birth and simply cease to exist." Gerald stood frozen, trying to process this impossible situation. Around him, reversal continued its backward existence. Snow fell upward, returning to the clouds. His truck's exhaust was being sucked back into the tailpipe. The moon moved visibly backward across the sky, setting in the east. "Why are you telling me this?" Gerald whispered. "Because we're desperate," the sheriff's reflection said, and Gerald could see tears running up the man's face, flowing from his jaw to his eyes, teardrops that then disappeared. "We've been living backward for 40 years. Some of us have reversed past our own births and vanished. We're running out of time, literally. In another few years, everyone who was alive in 1982 will have reversed out of existence. Please, Gerald, At least try. Even if you fail, at least someone will have attempted to free us." Gerald wanted to refuse. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to drive away, to escape this impossible town and never think about it again. But he saw the desperation in the sheriff's mirrored face, imagined the horror of living one's life backward, conscious and trapped. He nodded slowly. Following the sheriff's directions, Gerald drove to the edge of town and found a road that definitely didn't appear on his GPS. It wound up into the hills, and as he drove, he noticed his odometer was counting down instead of up. His fuel gauge was rising instead of falling, and his truck was getting cleaner rather than dirtier from the road dust. The reversal effect was getting stronger. The facility appeared at the end of the road, a brutalist concrete structure built into the hillside, completely windowless, with a single heavy door. Power lines ran to it from a dedicated substation, and Gerald could hear a deep thrumming pulse emanating from inside, felt more than heard, a vibration that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. He approached the door, and it opened before he touched it, swinging wide as if he'd just closed it, and time was reversing that action. Inside, the facility was a nightmare of reverse causality. Debris floated up from the floor and assembled itself into equipment. Spilled liquids flowed back into containers, and at the center of the main chamber, a massive sphere of energy pulsed and rotated, expanding and contracting. Time itself made visible and unstable. Control panels lined the walls, and Gerald could see a large red button marked "Emergency Shutdown" in mirror writing. He moved toward it, but the closer he got to the sphere, the stranger he felt. His movements became jerky, unpredictable. His arm reached for the button, but then withdrew without his conscious command. He was starting to reverse, his actions undoing themselves. Gerald concentrated with every ounce of willpower, fighting against the reversal effect. His hand moved toward the button, withdrew, moved forward again, withdrew. He was locked in a loop, unable to complete the action. The sphere pulsed brighter, and Gerald felt his memories starting to run backward, his thoughts unspooling. Tomorrow becoming today, today becoming yesterday. His life rewinding like a tape in reverse. In a moment of clarity, Gerald realized he couldn't fight reversal directly. Instead, he reached backward, grabbed a wrench from a tool cart he'd already walked past, and threw it with all his strength at the sphere. The wrench flew through the air in a wobbly, uncertain path, half moving forward and half moving backward, but momentum carried it into the energy field. The sphere convulsed. The thrumming pulse became a shriek. Cracks appeared in the energy field, spreading like lightning, and Gerald slapped his hand down on the emergency shutdown button in the instant before his arm reversed its motion. The sphere imploded silently, collapsing into a point of absolute darkness, and then vanished. The thrumming stopped. The reversal effect ended so abruptly that Gerald stumbled forward, his body suddenly following normal causality again. He stood gasping in the facility, which now looked abandoned, covered in 40 years of undisturbed dust, all the equipment dead and cold. Gerald ran back to his truck and drove into reversal, praying it had worked. The town looked different now, alive in a normal way. Lights burned in houses. A few cars were parked on Main Street. The clock ran clockwise. The flag hung correctly. And standing in the middle of the street, facing him properly, stood the sheriff, now looking exactly 40 years older, an elderly man with tears of joy streaming correctly down his face. The sheriff raised one hand in salute as Gerald drove past, and Gerald saw other residents emerging from buildings, all of them elderly now, aged by the 40 years they'd lived backward and now forward again. They were free, but they'd lost so much time. lived entire lives in reverse, experiencing death before birth in their backward journey. Gerald drove away from reversal, and when he checked his GPS, the town had vanished from the maps entirely, as if it had never existed. He reported his electrical problems to his company, got the truck fixed at the next town, and never spoke about what had happened. But sometimes, late at night, Gerald feels time moving strangely around him. His watch runs counterclockwise for a few seconds. His memories surface in reverse order. Objects on his desk rearrange themselves backward. He wonders if touching that sphere left something inside him, some fragment of reversed causality that will never fully heal. And he wonders if he truly freed reversal, or if he simply moved it, displaced it to another time, another location, where it's waiting for the next traveler to discover a town living backward, trapped in a loop that never ends, where the future becomes the past and the past becomes nothing at all. Story 6, The Town That Whispers. Patricia Moore had been driving semi-trucks for 23 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts about places. So when she pulled into a town called Murmur Springs in eastern Oregon during July of 2021, her instincts immediately screamed danger despite the place looking perfectly peaceful. The town appeared well-maintained, with neat houses, trimmed lawns, and a charming main street lined with shops and cafes. But something felt profoundly wrong. Patricia had pulled off Highway 20 to grab coffee and use a restroom, basic necessities on a long haul. The town's welcome sign showed a population of 1,847, and the place looked inhabited, lights on in buildings, cars parked here and there. But as Patricia walked down the main street toward a coffee shop, she realized she couldn't hear anything normal. No engines running, no voices, no music from shops, no footsteps. Instead, the entire town was filled with whispers, thousands of whispers, maybe tens of thousands, coming from every direction simultaneously. Soft voices speaking words Patricia couldn't quite understand, the sounds overlapping and interweaving into a constant susurrus that seemed to emanate from the buildings themselves, from the pavement, from the air. The whispers rose and fell in waves, almost rhythmic, almost like breathing. Patricia entered the coffee shop, a bell chiming above the door, and found customers sitting at tables and a barista behind the counter. But none of them were talking normally. They all sat perfectly still, mouths slightly open, whispering continuously. Their eyes looked glazed, unfocused, staring at nothing. The barista, a young man with a name tag reading Kevin, whispered in a constant stream while his hands moved through the motions of preparing coffee, but not for anyone, just repetitive actions done over and over. "Hello?" Patricia said, her voice sounding too loud against the backdrop of whispers. Every person in the shop stopped whispering simultaneously. Heads turned toward her in perfect unison. Then they all spoke together, their words synchronized, still in whispers but now clear and directed. New voice, fresh voice, original voice. Not part of the chorus, not yet. But soon. Soon she'll whisper too, soon she'll join. Soon she'll add her voice to ours. Patricia backed toward the door, but it had closed and locked. The customers stood from their chairs, moving in perfect synchronization, approaching her while continuing their unified whisper. Every voice is precious. Every voice is unique. Every voice must be preserved. We collect them here. We keep them safe. We make them eternal. Whisper with us, Patricia. Add your voice to the chorus. Tell us your secrets, your memories, your life. Whisper them into the town and they'll echo forever. The barista reached out, and his touch on Patricia's arm felt like ice. Where his fingers made contact, She felt something pulling at her, trying to draw something out. Her lips moved involuntarily, forming words she didn't choose, whispers trying to escape from somewhere deep inside her mind. The whispers throughout the building intensified, becoming almost deafening despite their softness. Thousands of voices recounting lives, confessing secrets, repeating memories over and over in an endless cacophony. Patricia jerked away from the barista's touch and grabbed a chair, swinging it at the coffee shop's front window. The glass shattered, alarm blaring, and the unified whispers became a shriek of rage. Patricia dove through the broken window, feeling glass slice her arms and legs, and hit the sidewalk running. Behind her, the coffee shop's occupants poured through the door and broken window, still moving in synchronization, still whispering. But now, their whispers had become a chant. She knows too much. She heard too much. She must stay. She must whisper. She must add her voice to the town's chorus. Take her, catch her, make her speak. Patricia sprinted for her truck, parked 2 blocks away, and the entire town seemed to wake up. Doors opened in every building and people emerged, hundreds of them, all whispering, all moving in perfect unison toward her. They came from houses, shops, offices, all with those glazed eyes and constantly moving mouths, all speaking in whispered synchronization. She reached her truck, threw herself into the cab and fired up the engine. The townspeople surrounded her vehicle, pressing against it, hands slapping the metal, faces pressed to her windows. Their mouths moved constantly, and even through the closed cab, Patricia could hear their whispers clearly, each one recounting fragments of lives. I was born in Denver in 1943. My daughter's name was Susan. I worked as a teacher for 30 years. I died on August 15, 2003. I crashed my car on Highway 20. I stopped for gas and never left. I've been whispering for 16 years. Help us, join us, save us, become us. Patricia slammed the truck into gear and accelerated. The crowd didn't move aside, and she felt horrible thumps as bodies went under her wheels and bounced off her bumper. But when she checked her mirrors, all the people she'd hit were standing up again, unharmed, still whispering, still following. She roared out of Murmur Springs, watching in her mirrors as the entire population stood. At the town limits, hundreds of whispering figures watching her escape. Then, as if controlled by a single mind, they all turned in unison and walked back into the town, dispersing to their homes and shops and cafes, returning to their eternal whispering. Patricia drove for 6 hours straight, pulling over only when she reached Portland. She checked herself into an emergency room, claiming she'd been in an accident, needing treatment for the glass cuts and the shock. But the doctors found something else wrong with her. Her vocal cords showed strange damage, inflammation and scarring that shouldn't have been there. And Patricia realized she was whispering, had been whispering constantly since leaving Murmur Springs, repeating fragments of what she'd heard in that town, adding those borrowed memories to her own voice. It took 3 months of therapy and medication to stop the constant whispering, but Patricia never fully recovered. She still whispers sometimes, especially when sleeping, recounting lives that weren't hers, memories she never lived, secrets that belong to the hundreds of voices trapped in Murmur Springs. She researched the town obsessively and found disturbing records. Murmur Springs had been a normal town until 1967, when a radio transmitter facility was built nearby, broadcasting at unusual frequencies as part of a communication experiment. The experiment was shut down in 1972 after nearby residents reported hearing voices, but the damage had been done. The frequency had somehow transformed the town into a collector of voices, a trap for human speech, a place where every word spoken was captured, preserved, and endlessly repeated. Patricia tried to report it to authorities, but when state police investigated, they found Murmur Springs to be a normal, quiet town with friendly residents who had no idea what she was talking about. The police report said everyone seemed perfectly normal, though it noted that the town was remarkably quiet and residents spoke softly. 3 years later, Patricia still drives trucks, but she avoids Eastern Oregon, entirely taking routes hundreds of miles out of her way to ensure she never passes near Murmur Springs again. And sometimes, late at night when the highway is empty and quiet, she hears whispers on her CB radio, dozens of voices overlapping, recounting lives and deaths and secrets, and among them, she recognizes the voice of the barista from the coffee shop, still whispering, still trapped, still adding his voice to the eternal chorus. The town is still there, still collecting voices, still waiting for travelers who stop to rest or refuel or simply visit. And everyone who lingers too long adds their voice to the whispers, becoming part of a chorus that never ends, speaking memories that will echo forever through a town that refuses to be silent. Story 7th, The Town Made of Shadow. James Whitaker transported heavy machinery across the southwestern United States, and during 15 years of driving, he thought he'd seen every kind of landscape the region had to offer. Then he encountered Umbra, New Mexico, and realized how wrong he'd been. The town didn't appear on any map, but James found it anyway during September of 2019, when his route through New Mexico's backcountry put him on a deteriorating state highway at dusk. The sun was setting when James saw the town in the distance, silhouetted against the orange sky. But something about the silhouette looked wrong. The buildings appeared too dark, as if they were constructed from shadow rather than material substance. As James drove closer and the sun dropped below the horizon, the town didn't gain detail the way normal places did. Instead, it became more shadowy, more indistinct, as if darkness itself had been shaped into structures. James entered Umbra as twilight faded to night, and the wrongness intensified. The buildings were made of shadow, he realized, not metaphorically but literally. Walls of condensed darkness, roofs of solidified shade, windows that showed only black voids inside. His headlights passed through the buildings without illuminating them. The light absorbed completely, revealing nothing. The street was paved with shadow that somehow supported his truck's weight while looking insubstantial. And there were people, dozens of them, walking the shadow streets, entering and exiting the shadow buildings. But they were like photographic negatives, their skin pure white, their clothes black, their features inverted in a way that hurt James's eyes to perceive. They moved normally, going about daily activities, but in this reversed color scheme that made them look like ghosts, like impressions of human beings, rather than the real thing. James stopped his truck in what appeared to be the town square, and the shadow people gathered around his vehicle. They didn't speak, but James could hear them anyway, their voices coming from inside his own head, bypassing his ears entirely. Lightbearer, color keeper, real walker. You don't belong in Umbra. You're too bright, too solid, too present. This is a town of absence, not presence. Why have you come to the place where light cannot reach? I didn't mean to come here, James said aloud, his voice sounding muffled, absorbed by the surrounding shadow. I was just driving through. I'll leave now. The shadow people pressed closer to his truck, and James realized they were reaching toward him, their inverted hands stretching out, fingers extending impossibly long. You brought light with you, the voices said in his mind. Real light, from the real world. We haven't seen real light in so long. Give it to us. Let us touch it, taste it, remember what it was like before we became shadows. Just a small piece. Just a fragment. Let us have some of your light. Their fingers touched his truck's metal skin, and where they made contact, James saw his vehicle's paint darkening, color draining away, being absorbed into those shadow hands. The shadow people were feeding on the light, on the reality of his truck, converting it slowly into the same shadow substance that made up their entire town. James hit the accelerator, but his truck lurched forward only a few feet before the engine sputtered and died. The shadow people had touched his fuel tank, and the gasoline inside was transforming, becoming shadow fuel, useless, insubstantial. James tried his emergency radio, but it produced only a strange inverted sound, noise that created silence instead of breaking it. He was trapped. The shadow people surrounded his truck completely now, and James could see dozens more emerging from the shadow buildings, all converging on his vehicle, drawn by the light and color and reality he represented. Their voices filled his head. We were a real town once. U.s.a was founded in 1889, a mining town, silver and copper. But in 1952 they tested something nearby. A weapon designed to absorb light, to create zones of absolute darkness where enemies couldn't see, couldn't fight. The test went wrong. The darkness didn't dissipate. It grew, expanded, consumed the entire town. We became part of it, converted into shadows, neither alive nor dead, existing in this state of absence. We've been hungry for light ever since, desperate for any fragment of reality to remind us what we lost. James felt them pulling at him now, not physically but in some deeper way, trying to draw him out of his truck and into the shadow town. His vision began to invert, colors reversing, his skin looking too pale, his clothes too dark. He was being converted, transformed into a shadow like them, and the process felt like dying, like having his substance slowly drained away. In desperation, James grabbed his emergency flare gun and fired it through the windshield. The flare exploded into brilliant red light, and the shadow people shrieked, recoiling. But unlike in normal circumstances, the light didn't illuminate the town. Instead, it carved a hole through the shadow, creating a tunnel of absence where the light passed, as if reality couldn't coexist with U.s.a's darkness. The tunnel led out of town, a path of empty space through the shadow buildings. James threw himself out of his truck and ran through that tunnel of absence. Behind him, the shadow people wailed, their voices in his head becoming anguished. Don't leave us here. Don't abandon us in the darkness. Bring light back. Bring reality back. Help us become real again. But James ran without stopping, following the tunnel the flare had carved, and as the light faded, the tunnel closed behind him. He emerged from U.s.a on the far side of town, the real world suddenly present again, solid ground under his feet, stars visible overhead, normal darkness that was merely the absence of light rather than a presence in itself. His truck was gone, still trapped in U.s.a, converted fully to shadow by now. James walked 15 miles to the nearest real town and called his company to report the loss. When authorities investigated, they found no town called U.s.a anywhere in New Mexico. The highway James had been driving didn't exist on official maps, though satellite imagery showed a faint trace of old road, abandoned decades ago. James tried to pinpoint U.s.a's location, tried to guide investigators to it, but the town couldn't be found in daylight. Only at dusk he realized, during that transition time between light and dark, when shadows were strongest, could U.s.a be perceived. And even then, only by people who were lost, who were in transition themselves, moving between one place and another. 6 months later, James received a package with no return address. Inside was his truck's key ring, but the metal was wrong, dark and cold and slightly insubstantial, like it was made of compressed shadow. Attached to it was a note written in inverted text, white words on black paper. "Your truck is still here, James. Still running. Still waiting. The shadow fuel never depletes. You could drive forever in Umbra, through streets of darkness, past buildings of condensed void. Come back. Become shadow with us. Leave the painful light behind and embrace the peace of absence." James destroyed the key ring and the note, but he kept finding them. They appeared in his mailbox, in his new truck's cab, on his pillow when he woke up. Always the same message, always the invitation to return. And sometimes, at dusk, James sees Umbra in the distance when he drives through New Mexico, the shadow town visible for just a moment as day transitions to night, and he recognizes his truck parked in the town square, a shadow vehicle among shadow buildings, waiting for its driver to return. He never will return. The light is too precious, reality too valuable. But James thinks about the shadow people constantly, trapped in their state of absence, hungry for the light they lost, converted by government testing into something neither living nor dead. He wonders how many other towns exist like Umbra, hidden in transition moments, populated by people transformed into something less than real, waiting for travelers who might bring fragments of light into their darkness. And he wonders if someday he'll be driving at dusk and accidentally turn down that unnamed road again, and this time he won't have a flare to light his escape. Story 8. The Town That Repeats. Linda Vasquez had been hauling agricultural equipment for 9 years when she encountered recursive Kansas in May of 2020. The town's name should have warned her, but she was exhausted after 14 hours of driving and desperately needed rest. When her GPS showed a motel in Recursive just off Highway 56, Linda took the exit gratefully. The town looked typical of rural Kansas: grain elevators, a few shops, houses spread out along quiet streets, a single-story motel with a parking lot. Linda checked in at the front desk, where a middle-aged woman with a name tag reading Helen gave her a room key and directions to room 14. Linda barely noticed that Helen's smile looked strained, her eyes tired, as if she'd been awake for days. Room 14 was standard, clean but worn, with a queen bed, a TV bolted to the dresser, and a bathroom with dripping faucet. Linda collapsed onto the bed without undressing, intending to sleep for just a few hours before continuing her route. She checked the alarm clock, 11:47 p.m. She set her phone alarm for 5 a.m. and closed her eyes. She woke to her alarm and checked her phone, 5 a.m., but the room's clock still read 11:47 p.m. Linda dismissed it as a broken clock, gathered her things and headed for the door. When she opened it, she found herself looking at the interior of room 14, as if the door had opened into the same room. She stood in the doorway, staring at the bed she'd just left. The TV, the bathroom, all identical because they were identical. The same room, impossibly connected to itself. Linda stepped through the doorway and found herself entering room 14 from the outside door, as if she'd walked in a circle that didn't exist. She tried again, walking through the door repeatedly, and each time she emerged back into room 14, entering from the outside door. The same alarm clock reading 11:47 p.m., the same faucet dripping in the bathroom. She was trapped in a loop, she realized, some kind of spatial repetition that kept returning her to the starting point. Linda tried the window, but when she climbed through it, she found herself climbing in through the bathroom window, back into room 14. She tried breaking through the wall, but behind the drywall was another layer of room 14, nested inside itself like Russian dolls. Hours passed, or seemed to pass, though the clock never changed from 11:47 p.m. Linda walked through that door hundreds of times, always returning to the start. She tried crawling under the bed, climbing into the ceiling, even hiding in the closet. But every exit led back to the room's entrance. Every escape route looped back to the beginning. Eventually, exhausted and terrified, Linda heard knocking. She opened the door, expecting another iteration of room 14, but instead found Helen from the front desk, standing in a hallway that looked normal. "You're experiencing the recursion," Helen said tiredly. "I'm sorry. I should have warned you. But if I warn people, they don't check in, and the town needs them to check in. Recursive needs the guests." "What is this place?" Linda demanded. Helen gestured for Linda to follow, and when Linda stepped into the hallway, it remained a hallway, didn't loop back. Helen led her to the motel's parking lot, and Linda saw her truck parked normally. Other vehicles sat in the lot too, dozens of them, all covered in dust and cobwebs, clearly abandoned for years. "Recursive isn't just the town's name," Helen explained. "It's the town's nature. Something happened here in 1986, a tornado that touched down right in the center of town. But instead of destroying everything, it created a loop. Time and space in recursive began repeating, recursing, folding back on themselves. The same moment happens over and over. The same day repeats. Rooms connect to themselves. Conversations replay. Everything recurs." "How do I leave?" Linda asked, her voice shaking. "You can't. Not really," Helen said. "Oh, you can drive away, get back on the highway, think you've escaped. But recursive is part of you now. The loop is inside you. Within a few days, you'll find yourself back here, without meaning to return, pulled back by the recursion. And each time you return, the loop gets stronger, tighter. Eventually, you'll be like me, like the others, living the same moments over and over, unable to leave even when you're standing outside the town, because everywhere becomes recursive. Everywhere becomes the loop." Linda ran to her truck, ignoring Helen's calls. She fired up the engine and drove away from the motel, away from recursive, back onto Highway 56. The town disappeared in her mirrors, and Linda felt hope surge through her chest. She'd escaped, she'd broken free. But 3 days later, Linda found herself pulling off Highway 56, taking the exit to recursive, even though she'd planned to drive straight through Kansas. She didn't remember making the decision. One moment she was on the interstate, the next she was entering recursive, parking at the motel, checking in with Helen, who smiled that strained, exhausted smile and gave her the key to room 14. Linda tried to resist. She stayed in her truck, refused to go into the room. But time began to loop even in the parking lot. She'd look at her phone, see 11:47 p.m. blink, and it would still read 11:47 p.m. She'd start her engine, drive out of the parking lot, and find herself pulling back in, the same truck, the same parking space, the loop now encompassing everything she did. On her 5th visit, or maybe her 50th, Linda lost count. She met the other trapped travelers, dozens of people, truck drivers and salespeople and tourists, all caught in recursive's loops, all returning compulsively, unable to break free. They held support meetings in the motel lobby, sharing strategies for managing the recursion, tips for maintaining sanity while living the same moments over and over. The trick is to find variation within the repetition, an older man named George explained. He'd been trapped for 12 years. The loop repeats, but you don't have to repeat exactly. Do something different each time. Change the pattern. It's the only way to preserve your sense of self. Linda tried. She changed her routine with each visit, eating different meals, wearing different clothes, driving different routes through town. But the loop was tightening. Her visits became more frequent, lasting longer. Days would pass in what felt like hours. She'd lived the same moment 50 times before it progressed to the next moment. Then Linda discovered something. In room 14, hidden behind the alarm clock that always read 11:47 p.m., she found a journal left by a previous victim. The entries described a way to break the recursion, find the loop's center, the exact point where the tornado had created the spatial temporal fold, and disrupt it somehow. Introduce a variation strong enough to break the pattern. The journal gave coordinates. The center of the recursion was in the town's water tower, in the exact center of the tank. Linda studied the tower from her motel window. Getting to it would require climbing, breaking in, possibly drowning in the water tank. But the alternative was remaining trapped in recursive forever, living in loops that grew tighter with each iteration until she was nothing but a repeated action, an echo of a person, a ghost in the recursion. During her next visit to recursive, Linda didn't go to room 14. She drove to the water tower, climbed the maintenance ladder, and broke through the hatch at the top. Inside, the tank held thousands of gallons of water, and floating in the exact center, Linda saw something impossible, a perfect sphere of empty space. A void where the tornado's eye had been, still present, still spinning slowly, distorting everything around it. Linda dove into the water and swam toward the sphere. As she got closer, time began to stutter. She'd move forward 1 second, then repeat that second, then move forward again, trapped in micro loops. The water filled her lungs and then emptied, then filled again, the same breath drowning her over and over. But she reached the sphere and pushed her hand into it. The void was cold beyond imagining, existence itself inverted, and when Linda touched it, she felt the recursion break. The sphere collapsed, imploded, and time rushed forward in a torrent. Linda experienced every repeated moment simultaneously, thousands of iterations of 11:47 p.m. happening at once, overlapping, conflicting, canceling each other out. She woke up on the ground beside the water tower, coughing up liquid, her body aching. The tower was rusted, ancient, clearly unused for decades. The town around her looked abandoned. Buildings collapsed, streets cracked and overgrown. Recursive had died, she realized, probably decades ago, and only the recursion had kept it seeming alive. Linda drove away, and this time she didn't return. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and she never felt the pull back to recursive. She'd broken the loop, freed herself and presumably everyone else trapped there. But Linda never confirmed it. She never went back to check if the others escaped, never tried to verify what happened to the town. Because sometimes, late at night, Linda still experiences micro-loops. She'll blink and repeat the blink. She'll take a step and take it again. Brief moments of recursion that suggest she didn't fully escape, that part of recursive is still inside her, a fragment of the loop that will remain forever, causing her to repeat small moments, to live in brief recursions for the rest of her life. And sometimes she wonders if she's actually still in room 14, still trapped in the loop, And everything since has been just another variation, another iteration, another attempt to escape that will eventually cycle back to 11:47 p.m., back to the motel, back to the recursion that never truly ends. Story 9th, The Town That Hungers. Robert Bear Mahoney had been hauling livestock feed for 21 years when he delivered to a ranch outside Devourer, Texas, in August of 2017. The town name made him uncomfortable, but names were just names, he told himself. The ranch coordinates put it 40 miles past Devourer, so Bear planned to drive straight through without stopping. But the universe had other plans. His trailer developed a tire blowout right in the center of town at 9:30 p.m., too late to get help until morning. Devourer looked empty, abandoned even, with boarded windows and locked doors and not a single light burning anywhere. Bear parked his disabled truck on Main Street and settled in for the night, planning to sleep in his cab until a repair service could arrive in the morning. But at exactly midnight, Devourer woke up. Lights blazed to life in every building simultaneously. Doors that had been padlocked swung open, and people emerged, dozens of them, from shops and homes and alleys, all converging on Main Street. But these weren't normal people. They moved with disturbing fluidity, their joints bending at wrong angles, their mouths hanging open too wide, and their eyes completely black, reflecting no light. They surrounded Bear's truck, and when they pressed their faces to his windows, he saw their mouths were full of teeth, far too many teeth, multiple rows of them like sharks. And those teeth were grinding, chomping, biting at the air as if these people were starving, desperate to eat anything, everything. One of them, a woman in a stained waitress uniform, spoke, but her voice came from everywhere at once, as if the entire town were speaking through her. Traveler, outsider, fresh meat. Devourer is hungry. Devourer is always hungry. Feed us. Feed the town. Give us your substance so we may continue. Bear locked his doors and grabbed his CB radio, trying to call for help, but every channel carried only the sound of chewing, of teeth grinding, of wet swallowing. The people outside began rocking his truck, trying to tip it over, and Bear heard metal groaning as their supernatural strength started to overwhelm the vehicle's weight. In desperation, Bear climbed into his truck's sleeper berth and kicked out the rear window. He squeezed through, dropped to the pavement, and ran for the edge of town. The residents poured after him, but they didn't run normally. They moved in a scuttling, insect-like way, on hands and feet, their bodies bent backward, mouths snapping at the air as they pursued him. Bear was a large man, over 300 pounds, but fear gave him speed he didn't know he possessed. He sprinted down the dark highway, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart threatening to explode. Behind him, the sound of dozens of mouths chomping grew closer, and Bear risked a glance back. The residents were gaining, their black eyes fixed on him, their rows of teeth gleaming in the moonlight. He wasn't going to make it. They were too fast, too determined, too numerous. Bear saw a roadside ditch and dove into it, rolling down into muddy water and hiding beneath an overhanging bank. The residents swarmed past, still pursuing, not realizing he'd hidden. Their scuttling footsteps faded into the distance, and Bear lay in the mud, shaking, trying not to make a sound. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time losing meaning in the darkness. Eventually, Bear crawled out of the ditch and began walking away from Devourer, staying off the road, moving through scrub brush and desert sand. As dawn approached, he heard vehicles and flagged down a state trooper. The trooper listened to Bear's story with increasing skepticism. When they drove back to Devourer in daylight, the town looked long abandoned, buildings clearly derelict for decades. No signs of recent habitation. Bear's truck sat on Main Street, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if it had been there for years rather than hours. The tire wasn't blown out. It was completely missing, along with the whole wheel, the axle clean, as if the truck had been carefully disassembled rather than damaged. The trooper found no evidence of any residents, no footprints, no signs of disturbance. He ran Bear's license and found no outstanding warrants, no history of mental illness or substance abuse. Just a confused trucker with a disabled vehicle in a dead town. The trooper called a tow truck and advised Bear to get some rest, assuming exhaustion and stress had caused hallucinations. But Bear knew what he'd experienced was real. He researched Devourer obsessively and found disturbing history. The town had been founded in 1893, a small settlement built around a cattle operation. But in 1926, a terrible drought struck, crops failed, cattle died, and the residents began to starve. According to fragmentary records, something happened during that starvation, something that changed the residents fundamentally. Cannibalism was mentioned in one report, quickly suppressed. The town was abandoned in 1927, officially due to the drought, but local legends spoke of something worse, of hunger that became supernatural, of people who couldn't stop eating, who developed appetites for things beyond food. Bear also found records of disappearances. Over the decades, travelers had gone missing on the highway near Devourer, their vehicles found abandoned. No trace of the drivers ever discovered. The disappearances happened in clusters, every few years, as if something in Devourer needed periodic feeding. 3 months after his experience, Bear received a package. Inside was a tooth, huge and sharp, definitely human in origin but far larger than any tooth should be. A note accompanied it, written in what looked like dried blood. "You escaped the feeding, Robert, but Devourer remembers your taste. You fled before we could consume you, before your substance could nourish the town. The hunger remains unsatisfied. Return to us, feed us. Let us devour you completely and add your substance to ours. The town must feed." Bear burned the package, but more arrived, always containing teeth, always with messages written in blood, always demanding his return. He changed addresses, changed his name, changed his route to ensure he never drove near Devourer again. But the packages found him anyway, and the messages grew more insistent, more threatening. Then Bear's hair began falling out. His skin developed strange lesions that wouldn't heal. Doctors found nothing wrong, no disease, no explanation. But Bear was wasting away, losing weight despite eating normally, his body consuming itself from the inside. He realized what was happening. Devourer was feeding on him remotely, taking his substance slowly, draining him across the distance because he'd refused to return and be consumed properly. 2 years after his encounter, Bear weighed only 130 pounds, his body skeletal, his health failing. In a final desperate act, he drove back to Devourer, not to surrender, but to destroy. He filled his truck with gasoline cans and explosives, planning to burn the town completely, to eradicate whatever supernatural hunger resided there. But when Bear arrived, Devourer was waiting. The residents stood in neat rows on Main Street, all those black eyes watching, all those mouths full of too many teeth smiling. "Welcome home," they said in unison. "We knew you'd return. Everyone returns eventually. The hunger draws them back. Come feed us, Robert. Let us consume you. It will be quick. It will be painless. And you'll become part of Devourer forever." adding your hunger to ours, feeding eternal. Bear lit the fuses on his explosives and drove his truck straight into the center of town. The explosion was massive, destroying his truck, collapsing buildings, starting fires that spread through the derelict structures. Bear died in that explosion, consumed by flames instead of teeth, and he considered it a victory. But Devourer survived. The town rebuilt itself overnight, the buildings reforming from shadow and hunger, the residents reforming from the appetite that sustained them. And now, Bear walks among them, his body restored but wrong, covered in mouths that constantly chew, full of teeth that never stop grinding. He stands on Main Street each night, waiting for travelers, adding his voice to the town's unified hunger. Feed us, feed us, feed us. The town that hungers can never be satisfied, can never be destroyed, because it feeds on something more fundamental than flesh. It feeds on desperation, on the need to survive at any cost, on hunger itself made manifest and eternal. And every traveler who passes through, even those who escape, carries a piece of that hunger with them forever, slowly being consumed, slowly feeding Devourer across whatever distance they've fled, until eventually, inevitably, they return to be devoured completely. Story 10th. The Town of Names. Victor Zhang had been transporting electronics across the country for 6 years when he took a shortcut through rural Montana in December of 2021. Heavy snowfall had closed the interstate, and Victor's GPS routed him through back roads that barely qualified as paved. At 11 p.m. in near whiteout conditions, Victor saw lights in the distance and drove toward what he hoped would be shelter. The town sign read, "Nomenclature, population unlisted," and that should have been Victor's first warning. The town looked charming, a picture-perfect small mountain community with log buildings, warm light spilling from windows, smoke rising from chimneys. Victor parked in front of what appeared to be a bed and breakfast and hurried through the snow to the entrance. Inside, a fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and a woman in her 60s greeted him warmly. "Welcome to Nomenclature," she said with a genuine smile. "I'm the proprietor. You must be exhausted from driving in this weather. Come in, come in. We have a room ready for you." "Thank you," Victor said, stamping snow from his boots. "I'm Victor Zhang." The moment his name left his lips, the proprietor's expression changed. Her smile remained, but her eyes went flat, empty, and she repeated his name slowly. "Victor Zhang. Victor Zhang. 2 names, first and last, identity and heritage. Very good, very useful." She pulled a heavy leather-bound book from beneath the counter and began writing in it with a fountain pen, speaking aloud as she wrote, "Victor Zhang, December 17th, 2021, 11:14 p.m. Gave his name freely, without prompting, without suspicion. The name is now recorded, now bound, now owned." Victor felt something change inside his chest, a sensation like hooks sinking into something fundamental, pulling tight. "What did you just do?" "I took your name, of course," the proprietor said pleasantly. "That's what we do here in Nomenclature. That's what the town is for. We collect names, we bind them, we own them, and when we own someone's name, we own that person. You're part of Nomenclature now, Victor Zhang. Or should I say, you're part of the collection." Victor backed toward the door, but before he reached it, other residents entered the bed and breakfast from various rooms. Maybe 20 people, all ages, all wearing pleasant expressions that didn't reach their eyes. They formed a semicircle around Victor, blocking his escape, and they all spoke in unison. Victor Zhang. We know you now. We own your name. Where your name goes, you must follow. Where your name is spoken, you must appear. You belong to nomenclature now. You cannot leave. Without permission, you cannot hide while we call your name. The proprietor approached Victor, still holding that leather-bound book, and Victor glimpsed other names written in it. Hundreds of pages filled with names in careful script. Everyone who comes to nomenclature makes the same mistake, she explained. They give their name freely, not realizing that names have power, that names are binding, that to name something is to control it. Ancient magic. Victor, older than civilization. The magic of true names and binding contracts. This is insane, Victor said, his voice shaking. You can't just own someone's name. We don't just own it, another resident said, a young man with an unsettling smile. We control it. Watch. He opened his mouth and spoke Victor's name, but he spoke it wrong, twisted it, changed the pronunciation subtly, and Victor felt his body move without his control, taking 3 steps forward against his will, responding to the corrupted version of his name like a puppet on strings. The residents laughed, not cruelly but with genuine delight, like children playing with a new toy. Your name is ours to use however we wish, the proprietor said. We can call you, compel you, reshape you. We can speak your name and make you dance, make you sing, make you reveal your deepest secrets. Names have always had power, Victor. We've just learned to harness it properly. Victor bolted, shoving past the residents and running for the door. They didn't chase him physically, but as he ran through the snow toward his truck, he heard them chanting his name in unison, speaking it in dozens of different ways, each pronunciation pulling at him, trying to compel him back. His legs fought against him, his own body trying to obey the called name, but Victor's will was strong, strengthened by terror, and he reached his truck. He fired up the engine and drove away from nomenclature as fast as the snowy roads allowed. In his rearview mirror, the residents stood in the street, still chanting his name, and even as the distance grew, Victor could feel their voices pulling at him, creating an almost physical ache in his chest, a compulsion to turn around, to return, to answer when his name was called. Victor drove for hours, putting hundreds of miles between himself and nomenclature before stopping at a legitimate hotel in Billings. But that night, lying in bed, Victor heard his name whispered in the darkness, not from the room, but from inside his own head, the residents of nomenclature calling him across the distance, using the power of his bound name to maintain their connection. He tried to ignore it, tried to sleep, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Victor Zhang, they called, over and over, and each repetition made the hooks in his chest pull tighter, made the compulsion to return stronger. Victor realized with horror that they could call him forever, could summon him from any distance, could use his name to control him for as long as they held it bound in their book. Victor researched obsessively, searching for ways to break name-binding magic, to sever the connection between himself and nomenclature. Old folklore and modern occult texts suggested few solutions, all of them difficult, all of them risky. The most reliable method was to legally change his name, to abandon Victor Zhang entirely and become someone else. The binding would weaken without a legally recognized name to anchor to, though it might never break completely. Victor filed the paperwork, changed his name to Marcus Chen, destroyed every document that bore his original name, told everyone he knew to never speak Victor Zhang aloud again. The whispers faded, the compulsion weakened, and for a while Victor thought he'd escaped. But on the anniversary of his visit to nomenclature, Exactly 1 year later, Victor woke to find the proprietor standing at the foot of his bed. She looked exactly the same, still holding that leather-bound book, still wearing that empty smile. "You changed your name," she said with mild disappointment. "Clever, but incomplete. You see, Victor, you gave us your true name, the name your parents chose, the name you lived with for 32 years. That name is part of your identity, woven into who you are. Changing it legally doesn't erase that connection. It merely weakens it temporarily." The proprietor opened the book to Victor's page, and he saw his name there, still written in careful script, but now with Marcus Chen written beside it in different ink. "We know all your names now," she continued. "Every name you've ever been called, every name you'll ever take. They're all connected to the true name you gave us. You can change your legal identity 1,000 times, but you'll always be Victor Zhang in our book, and that means you'll always be ours to call." Victor tried to scream, but the proprietor spoke his true name, and his voice froze in his throat. She spoke it again differently, and Victor's body stood from the bed without his control. She spoke it a third time, and Victor walked toward her, puppet limbs moving in jerky obedience. "You have two choices," the proprietor said. "Return to nomenclature and live there permanently, serving the town, adding your power to ours as we collect more names. Or stay here, in the outside world, but answer every time we call. Come to us whenever we summon, and live with the knowledge that your name is never truly yours. You are owned, Victor Zhang, now and forever, because you gave away the most fundamental thing a person possesses, their name." Victor woke in his bed, sweating, shaking, the proprietor gone. But on his nightstand sat the leather-bound book, open to his page, and written below his names was a message: "We will call you again soon. Answer promptly, or the punishment will be severe." Signed, the residents of nomenclature. Victor still drives trucks, still lives under the name Marcus Chen, still tries to maintain a normal life. But several times a year, he hears his true name whispered in the darkness, spoken with that corrupted pronunciation that makes his body move without permission. And each time, he finds himself driving without conscious decision, his truck turning toward Montana, toward the mountain roads, toward nomenclature, answering the call of his bound name. He fights it, sometimes successfully, but the compulsion grows stronger with each summons. Victor knows that eventually, inevitably, he'll return to nomenclature permanently. Will join the residents in their collection of names, will help them bind new travelers who make the fatal mistake of giving their names freely. And sometimes, late at night, Victor whispers his own name to himself, trying to reclaim it, trying to break the binding through sheer force of will. But the name doesn't sound like his anymore. It sounds like something owned by someone else, a title that belongs to nomenclature, not to the person who was born with it. Never give your name to strangers in strange towns. Never speak it aloud where power might be listening, because names are more than labels, more than convenient identifiers. Names are binding contracts written in the substance of identity itself, and once surrendered, once bound, once owned, they can never truly be reclaimed. Victor Zhang learned that lesson too late, and now his name echoes through nomenclature's book forever, called whenever the town hungers for his presence, binding him to a place he can never fully escape, because to escape would require abandoning his name entirely, and a person without a name is a person without identity, without self, without existence. The town of names is always collecting, always binding, always calling. And somewhere in that leather-bound book, there might be a page waiting for your name too.